Now, a Nazir who deliberately violates the Nazirut prohibitions is punished with lashes. However, before anyone can be punished with lashes for any sin, he must first be warned that what he is about to do is forbidden, and that if he does it, he will be punished. As the Rambam writes in Echot Sanhedrin, chapter 16, Halacha 4. Mishnah Dal discusses the law of a Nazir who violates the Nazirut prohibition several times after being warned. Nazir sheyesh shoteh yain kol hayom eno chayav ela achat. A Nazir who kept drinking wine all day, but he was warned only once before he started drinking, is liable to only one set of lashes. Amru lo al tishteh v'hu shoteh. But if they warned him repeatedly, do not drink, and he drank wine after each warning. However, just as the commentaries point out, if he was not warned again before the next drink, he does not receive another set of lashes, since it is possible that he forgot the warning and did not realize that he was forbidden to drink the next cup of wine. In order to receive lashes for these further drinks, he must drink enough each time for a Nazir to be punished, either a kazait, an olive's volume, or a revit, a quarter log, as taught in Mishnah 1. But again, Amru lo al tishteh v'hu shoteh. If they warned him repeatedly, do not drink, and he drank wine after each warning, chayav kol echad ve'echad, he is liable to another set of lashes for each drink he drank after a new warning. The same is true as regards shaving his head. If he kept shaving his hairs off his head all day, but was warned only once before he began shaving, he receives only one set of lashes. Amrulo al tegalech vu megalech. But if they warned him repeatedly, do not shave, and he shaved even a single hair after each warning, chayav al kol echad ve'echad, he is liable to another set of lashes for each hair that he shaved after a warning, because the Nazir is liable to lashes for shaving even a single hair, as we learned in the previous Mishnah. The same is true in regard to becoming tameh to a human corpse. If he kept making himself tameh to corpses all day, but was warned only once before he began doing so, he receives only one set of lashes. But if they warned him repeatedly, do not make yourself tameh, and he made himself tameh again after each warning, he is liable to another set of lashes for each time that he made himself tameh after a new warning. He is liable for each time he touched the corpse again, even though he did not become tahor in between, as the Gemara says on page 42b in Masechet Nazir, in the view of Rav Yosef. Now the Mishnah deals with the punishments that the court administers for Nazir's violations. In heaven, however, each violation is counted as a sin regardless of the number of warnings he received. And that is in the Mishnah Daled. Mishnah Hey begins, Shelosha minin asurin benazir. Three kinds of things are prohibited to a Nazir. Hatuma v'tiglachat v'yotzeh min hagafen, becoming tameh from a corpse, shaving the hair of the head, and eating or drinking products of the grapevine. Now this was taught in Mishnah 1. It is repeated here as an introduction to the next part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah contrasts these three prohibitions. The prohibitions against becoming tameh and shaving are stricter than the prohibition against eating and drinking products of the grapevine in the following way. Because tameh and shaving cause a Nazir to forfeit all or some of the days of his Nazirut. The verse states that if a Nazir becomes tameh at any time during his term, he forfeits all the days of Nazirut that he already observed, and he must start counting his Nazirut all over again, as it says in Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 6, verse 12, and we spoke about earlier in chapter 3, Mishnah 3 and 4. Similarly, if he shaved in the middle of his term of Nazirut, he must observe up to 30 more days of Nazirut before he can conclude his term, as we learned in Mishnah 3. Now, becoming tameh and shaving are comparable in the sense that they both cause at least some forfeiture of days. They are not, however, actually the same. The Mishnah will soon contrast these prohibitions with each other. Whereas eating or drinking products of the grapevine does not cause a Nazir to forfeit any days of his Nazirut. This is so on the biblical level. However, if he drank wine deliberately during his term, he is rabbinically required to repeat the days on which he drank wine, as we learned in chapter 5, Mishnah 3. On the other hand, the prohibition against eating or drinking products of the grapevine is stricter than the prohibition against becoming tameh and shaving in the following way. The prohibition against eating or drinking products of the grapevine is never permitted, even as an exception to the rule. The Torah implies that a Nazir may not drink wine even when there is a mitzvah for him to do so, as the Rav explains based off the Gemara in Masechet Nazir, page 44a, for example, where he had previously sworn to drink wine. Certainly he may not drink wine for Kiddush or Havdalah, where there is only a rabbinic obligation to say these over wine, as the Rambam writes in Echot Nazir, chapter 7, Halacha 11. Whereas the prohibitions against becoming tameh and shaving are sometimes permitted as exceptions to their rules, but tiglachat mitzvah, as in the case of shaving that is required by a mitzvah, namely shaving a mitzvah during its purification process. A Torah states that a mitzorah, a person who becomes tameh as a result of certain skin discolorations, as it mentions in Vayikra chapter 13, and here in the Mishnah chapter 7, Mishnah 3, must shave all his hair as part of his purification process. If a Nazir becomes a mitzorah, needs to purify himself, the positive commandment to shave the hair of a purifying mitzorah overrides the negative commandment against shaving a Nazir, what we call aseh doche lo ta'aseh. Uvmet mitzvah, and in the case of a corpse whose burial is required by a special mitzvah, namely an abandoned corpse which has no one to bury it, someone who finds a corpse with no one to bury it, what we call met mitzvah, is required to bury it himself even if he is a Nazir. This is learned from the fact that the Torah lists separately each of the close relatives to which a Nazir may not become tameh. This teaches that although he may not become tameh to his relatives, he is permitted to become tameh to bury an abandoned corpse, and this will be elaborated in chapter 7, Mishnah 1. The chomer batuma batiglachat, and the prohibition against becoming tameh stricter than the prohibition against shaving in the following way, right? Chomer batuma mi batiglachat, shatuma soteret at kol v'chayvin alei korban. When a Nazir becomes tameh, the tuma causes him to forfeit the entire Nazirut. After he becomes tahor, he must start counting his term of Nazirut over again from the beginning, and none of the days he observed before becoming tameh count toward his term, as we will see in chapter 6, Mishnah 12, and we saw in chapter 3, Mishnah 3. And right, so shatuma stored at kol v'chayvin alei korban. When a Nazir becomes tameh, the tuma causes him to forfeit the entire Nazirut, and after he purifies himself, before he starts counting his Nazirut over again, he is obligated to bring an offering for his tuma. This will be explained further in the next Mishnah. V'tiglachat ena soteret ela 30 yom ve'en chayvin alei korban. Whereas when a Nazir's head is shaved during his term of Nazirut, the shaving causes him to forfeit no more than 30 days of Nazirut, as we learned in Mishnah 3, and he is not obligated to bring an offering for his shaving. That is the end of Mishnah Vav. Now, there are two occasions, that is the end of Mishnah Hey. There are two occasions on which a regular Nazir must shave his head. Every Nazir is obligated to shave his head when he concludes his Nazirut. This is referred to in the Mishnah as the shaving of Tahara. The concluding ritual of a Nazir can be performed only by a Nazir who is Tahor from corpse Tumah. The ritual is described in Bamidbar chapter 6 verses 13 to 20, and it is discussed in Mishnah 7. In addition, a Nazir becomes tameh from a corpse must shave his head as part of the ritual he performs to allow him to start his Nazirut over again. This shaving is referred to as a shaving of Tumah and is the subject of this Mishnah, Mishnah Vav. Tiglachat Tumah, the shaving of Tumah, is described in Bamidbar chapter 6 verses 9 to 12. We begin with Mishnah Vav. Tiglachat Tumah Ketzad. What is the procedure for the shaving of Tumah? Meaning, if a Nazir becomes tameh and needs to start his Nazirut over again, what procedure does he follow? Hayam mazeh b'shlishi u'bashvi'i. He would have the purification water, the spring water mixed with the ashes of the parah dumah, sprinkled upon him on the 3rd and 7th days after he becomes tameh. This part of the procedure, which is done simply to purify the Nazir from the tumah, is the same as the purification for any other person who becomes tameh from a corpse, as described in Bamidbar chapter 19. The purification water is made by mixing the ashes of a parah dumah, a red cow, with spring water. This water is sprinkled on the person who is tameh on the 3rd and 7th days of his tumah. After being sprinkled on the 7th day, the person must also immerse himself in a mikveh to complete his purification. Umegalech b'shvi'i, and the Nazir would shave his head on the 7th day after being sprinkled and immersing himself in a mikveh, and then wait until nightfall when he became completely tahor. As is the case with most forms of tumah, a person does not become completely tahor from corpse tumah until the end of the day in which he immerses in a mikveh. He would then bring his offerings to allow him to start his Nazirut over again on the 8th day, on the day after his purification, as stated in Bamidbar chapter 6 verse 10. Now, since sacrificial offerings cannot be brought at night, he had to wait until the next day to bring them. The Nazir brought 2 birds and a lamb for his tumah offerings. It says in Bamidbar chapter 6 verses 10 to 12. He was then ready to start his Nazirut over again. The Mishnah teaches the law for a Nazir who completed his purification from tumah on the 7th day, but delayed his shaving until the 8th day. If he shaved his head on the 8th day instead of the 7th, he may bring his offerings to allow him to start counting his Nazirut over again on that day, and he does not need to wait until the next day to bring them. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva's ruling is questioned from the law of the Mitzorah, who must also shave to become tahor. A Mitzorah also undergoes a 7-day purification procedure, at the end of which he must shave all his body hair. It says in Vayikra chapter 14 verse 9. And in that case, he cannot bring his offerings until the day after he shaves. It says over there in Vayikra chapter 14 verses 9 and 10. Amar lo Rabbi Talfon said to Rabbi Akiva, Ma ben zel mitzvah. What is the difference between this case of the Nazir Tameh, who if he delays shaving until the 8th day may shave and bring his offerings on the same day, and a mitzvah who if he delays shaving his body until the 8th day of his purification process may not bring his offerings until the 9th day, meaning he must wait until the day after he shaves to bring his offering. What's the difference? Rabbi Akiva answers the question. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Talfon, Zeh ta'orato teluya b'yamav. In the case of this one, the Nazir Tameh, his purification from Tumah depends solely on his 7 days of purification, which includes sprinkling, following by immersion in a mikveh, but not on his shaving. Once a Nazir Tameh counts the 7 days of his purification and is sprinkled on the 3rd and 7th days, immerses in the mikveh and waits for sunset, he becomes completely tahor even if he did not shave. Since his purification was complete on the day before, there is no reason why he cannot shave and bring his offerings on the next day. The Torah requires only that the offerings wait until the day after he becomes tahor. Since in the case of a Nazir Tameh his shaving has nothing to do with his becoming tahor, there is no reason why he cannot shave on the 8th day and then immediately bring his offerings. In the case of a mitzorah, though, his purification depends on his shaving, and he cannot become tahor until he shaves his body and then immerses in a mikveh, which is implied by the verse in Vayikra chapter 14 verse 9, on the 7th day he shall shave off all his hair and immerse his flesh in water, and then he will become tahor. And since a mitzorah may not bring his offerings until night has fallen on the day of his purification, the mitzorah can never bring his offerings on the day he shaves. Now in short, both the Nazir Tameh and mitzorah cannot bring their offerings until the day after they become tahor. Since head shaving is not part of a Nazir's becoming tahor, though it is required for other reasons, a Nazir will delay shaving until the 8th day, the day after he becomes tahor, may shave and bring his offerings on that day. In the case of a mitzorah, though, body shaving is part of his becoming tahor. Therefore, if he delays shaving until the 8th day, he cannot bring his offerings until the 9th day, the day after he becomes tahor. And the Rav does tell us, the halakha does follow the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. That is in the Mishnah Vav. We continue with Mishnah Zayin. The Mishnah now describes the concluding ritual for a Nazir who completes his term of Nazirut. Tiglacha da Tahara Ketzad. What is the procedure for the shaving of Tahara? Hayam mevi shalosh be'emot chatat ula u'shlamim. He would bring 3 animals to the temple for his offering. One is a chatat offering, one is an ula offering, and one is a shlamim offering. The chatat is a female lamb, the ula is a male lamb, and the shlamim is a ram, an adult male sheep, as stated in Bamidbar chapter 6, verse 14. He would slaughter the shlamim offering, which was the last of his 3 offerings, and then shave his head after them, after having slaughtered all 3 offerings. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. He shaved his head after he finished slaughtering all 3 animals in the order they are listed in the Mishnah and in the Torah, starting with the chatat and ending with the shlamim. Now the law that the Nazir shaves after slaughtering the shlamim is learned from a verse in the Nazir passage. However, the next Tana disagrees. Rabbi Elazar says, he would not wait to shave his head after the shlamim. Rather, he would shave immediately after slaughtering the chatat. Because whenever there are several offerings to be brought, the chatat always comes first. The Gemara in Tzvachim, page 98, learns this from a verse in Vayikra, chapter 5, verse 8. And it is therefore fitting that the Nazir shave his head immediately after the chatat is slaughtered. Now Rav does tell us, the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda, that he shaves his head after offering the shlamim offering, which was the last of his 3 offerings. The Mishnah concludes, however, if the Nazir shaved his head after any one of the 3 offerings was slaughtered, he fulfilled his obligation according to all opinions, meaning even if he slaughtered the offerings out of order, the slaughter of any one of them is enough to allow him to shave and conclude his Nazirut. This ruling is accepted even by the first Tana. The dispute that's quoted in the Mishnah is only about the preferred time to shave, and this too is learned from a verse, and that is then of Mishnah Zayin. Mishnah Chet continues to describe the concluding ritual of a Nazir. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Hevi shalosh be'emot velo perash. If a Nazir brought 3 animals to the temple for his offerings, he brought a female lamb, a male lamb, and a ram, but he did not specify which animal was for which offering. Usually when a person consecrates an animal as an offering, he must specify which type of offering he intends it to be. In this case, however, he just said that these 3 animals refers to zirut offerings. The one fit for the chatat, the female lamb is offered as the chatat. Le'olah tekriv olah, the one fit for the olah, the male lamb is offered as the olah. L'shlamim tikrav shlamim, and the one fit for the shlamim, the ram is offered as the shlamim. Since each of these animals is fit for only one of the Nazir offerings, When he designated the three of them to be his Nazir offerings, it is as if he designated each one specifically for the appropriate offering. The Mishnah teaches what is done with the Nazir's hair after he shaves his head. After shaving his head, the Nazir would take the hair that grew on his head during his term of Nazirut and throw it under the pot in which the meat of the Shlamim offering was cooking to be burned in the fire. As the verse states in Bamidbar chapter 6 verse 18, that this is the required procedure. Now the meat of a Nazir's ram was eaten by the Nazir and his guests, except for some portions that were given to Kohanim to eat. The meat had to be cooked in a pot, and the hair was thrown into the fire in which this pot was cooking. And if he shaved his head in the provinces outside the temple, somewhere in Yerushalayim, he would also throw his hair into the fire under the pot in which the Shlamim was cooking. The Nazir was allowed to shave his head anywhere in Yerushalayim. The Mishnah teaches that he threw his hair under the pot of his Shlamim offering, whether he shaved in the chamber of the Nazirim in the temple, where his Shlamim was being cooked, or whether he shaved it anywhere else in Yerushalayim. Now this explanation follows the standard reading of the Mishnah. The Rav had a different reading of the Mishnah. The Mishnah teaches that a Nazir did not throw his hair into the pot of his offering in every case. When were these words said that a Nazir would throw his hair into the pot? In cases of the shaving of Tara, where the Nazir shaves at the conclusion of his Nazirut. But in cases of the shaving of Tumah, where the Nazir becomes tameh from a corpse and shaved in order to start his term of Nazirut over again, he would not throw his hair under the pot of his offering, even if he shaved inside the temple in the chamber of the Nazirim. The Torah states the law of throwing the hair under the pot of the offering only in the context of the shaving of Tara. This Tana therefore rules that in the case of the shaving of Tumah, the Nazir does not throw his hair under the pot at all, even if he shaved in the chamber of the Nazirim in the temple. Rabbi Meir disagrees. Rabbi Meir says, Hakol mishalchin tachat adud, everyone, even a Nazir who shaves because he became tameh, throws his hair under the pot of his offering. Chutz min hatameh b'medina bilvad, except for Nazir who became tameh and who then shaved his head in the provinces outside of the temple. He alone does not throw his hair under the pot of his offering, rather he buries it in the ground. Now, according to Rabbi Meir, a Nazir who became tameh should throw his hair under the pot in which his offering is being cooked. Since the Nazir who is tameh does not bring a shlamim offering, he throws the hair under the pot in which the meat of his asham offering or his bird chatat is being cooked. Now Rabbi Meir also differentiates between a Nazir tameh who shaved in the temple and one who shaved outside the temple. If he shaved inside the temple, then he throws his hair into the fire. If he shaved outside the temple, then he buries it rather than burns it. And that is in Rabotai of Mishnah Chet. Now, after the Nazir brought his offerings and shaved his head at the conclusion of his Nazirut, he still had other rituals to perform. Mishnah Tet describes his final rituals. The Nazir would cook the meat of the Shlamim offering or the ram, or overcook it until the meat fell apart. Unlike other Shlamim offerings, which could be cooked, roasted, or baked, the Nazir's ram had to be cooked, as it says in Bamidbar, chapter 6, verse 19. The Mishnah teaches that overcooking the Nazir's ram was also acceptable. The Kohen would then take the cooked right foreleg of the ram, the chalat matzah echad min asal, and one loaf of matzah from the 10 loaves that were in the basket, ukik matzah echad, and one wafer of matzah from the 10 wafers in the basket. Besides bringing 3 animal offerings at the conclusion of his term of Nazirut, the Nazir also brought a basket that contained 20 matzot. 10 of these were made with oil. These were called chalot, loaves, and 10 were made without oil, but later smeared with oil. These were known as rikikin, wafers. 1 loaf and 1 wafer were taken together with the cooked foreleg of the ram for the next ritual described in this Mishnah. V'noten al kapei Nazir minifan, and placed them on the palms of the Nazir and waved them together with the Nazir back and forth and up and down. Afterward, the Nazir was permitted to drink wine and become tameh from corpses, as stated in the Torah. According to this Tana, the Nazir does not become permitted to drink wine or become tameh to a corpse until after all these rituals are completed, as verse 20 states in Sefer Bamidbar that we mentioned earlier in chapter 6. And the Kohen, together with the Nazir, shall wave them before Hashem, and afterward, after all these rituals have been performed, the Nazir shall drink wine. Now Rabbi Shimon disagrees about when the Nazir becomes permitted to do these things. Rabbi Shimon says, as soon as the blood of one of the offerings was thrown on the altar on the Nazir's behalf, Utara Nazir lishtot beyayin ulitamel ametim. The Nazir becomes permitted to drink wine and become tameh from corpses. Rabbi Shimon derives from the law of shaving that just as the slaughter of one animal is enough to allow the Nazir to shave, as we saw in Mishnah 7, so too the offering of one animal is enough to permit the Nazirut prohibitions. Therefore, as soon as the blood of one of the offerings has been applied to the altar, making that offering valid, his wine and tumah prohibitions have ended. And that, the Rav says, is the halacha. He says, v'chen halacha, that is the halacha. And that is the Rabotai of the Mishnah that we will do for now. We will continue B'ezrat Hashem after the Chagim. Every B'shra v'chag kasher v'sameach. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen v'amen.